It wasn't the sound of the digital clock radio that woke me up that brutal morning. It was the shrill, entitled voice just beyond the door of the bedroom I'd shared with my husband for 42 years. Look, I don't care about the sentimental value. It's a prime property. Tell the appraiser I want it valued at maximum market rate. No, I am the one authorizing the listing. This isn't her house anymore. It's mine. I'm the new owner, remember? And please get those documents ready for the sale closing next week. I want her gone before then. My heart didn't race. It didn't pound. It simply shattered. It was 5:01 a.m. and the cold, naked truth had finally clawed its way out of the shadows. My beloved William had been gone for only 6 months, and his son's wife Clara, the girl I had welcomed into my home and treated like a daughter, was already drawing up the eviction notice. I slid my hand under the pillow, feeling the cool, crisp edge of a small folded document. A document Clara didn't know existed. I thought back to the endless helpful forms she'd made me sign, the affectionate way she'd taken over my finances for my own good, the sweet, syrupy lies she'd whispered while plotting to steal the only thing my husband had ever asked me to protect. This house. Our legacy. She was selling it. She was selling us. The sheer arrogance of it. The entitlement. She genuinely believed I was too grief-stricken, too old, too stupid to fight back. She believed that a piece of paper she'd tricked me into signing was the final word. I took a deep breath and smiled, the kind of smile you save for the moment before the detonation, because there was something my dear daughter-in-law didn't know. William had always prepared for the worst. To understand the end, you have to understand the beginning. You have to understand the moment I became vulnerable. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and fading hope. This was where my vulnerability began, the deep pain. 6 months before that awful 5 a.m. alarm, William, my husband, was gone. Not suddenly, not violently, but with the quiet, drawn-out cruelty of an aggressive cancer. He was the anchor of my life, the keeper of our history, and the managing partner in every sense of the word. When he finally closed his eyes, he didn't just leave me widowed. He left me adrift in a sea of paperwork and legal jargon that I, frankly, had always happily deferred to him. I was emotionally shattered, clinging to the familiar walls of our beautiful Georgian home, the house William and I had restored from a ruin decades ago. It was more than property. It was a character in our marriage where we raised our son Michael. Losing William made me feel like I was losing my mind, my memory, even my sense of purpose. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, and the thought of reading a utility bill, let alone a trust document, felt monumental. This is precisely when Clara, my daughter-in-law, stepped in. She swooped in like a brightly colored, overly efficient angel. She was always perfectly dressed, always armed with a lavender latte and a solution. Clara was Michael's wife, a stunning, high-powered realtor with a smile that could sell swampland. I had always liked Clara, perhaps even loved her, but there was a subtle, grating quality to her that I'd always ignored. A polished ambition that felt too sharp, too transactional. Now she weaponized that polish. This was her pretend care. "Mom, you shouldn't be worrying about any of this," she'd say, gently prying a half-finished condolence card from my shaking fingers. "You need rest. You need peace. William would want you to be taken care of." She moved into our guest suite just temporarily, to help manage the funeral and the deluge of paperwork. She began by setting up all the online accounts for me. "Oh, the passwords, Mom, they're just so complicated now. Let me just link everything to my primary business email. It's easier for me to manage the bills this way." Every few days she'd bring me a sheaf of papers. "This is just the standard transfer for the utility accounts, Mom. Just sign here, it's nothing. Just so I can talk to the cable company." Or, "This is the authorization for the bank to discuss your accounts with me, darling. We need to check those pension allocations, don't we? Don't worry your pretty head, just initial right here." The signatures blurred together. It felt like one continuous, unending task of grief management. I trusted her because she was family, and in my fragile state, I desperately needed to be passive. She even started taking my car keys. "Just for a few weeks, Mom. You're too distracted to drive. I'll take you wherever you need to go. We can't risk an accident." control cloaked in concern. Michael, my son, was entirely absent from this dynamic. He was an engineer constantly on site overseas for months at a time. He called, but the calls were short, often just a few minutes, always supervised by Clara, who would hold my phone and remind me what I needed to tell him. Tell him you feel so much better now that I'm here, Mom. Tell him I've been a lifesaver with the accounts. The manipulation extended even to my own son, isolating me further. The first real alarm bell went off about a month later. It was the first insult. William had an extremely valuable, but small collection of antique British naval maps. He loved them. They hung in his study, right next to the massive leather-bound safe that held all our critical papers. One day, I went into the study, needing the comfort of his space, and found the wall bare. I asked Clara about it that evening. She was scrolling through her phone, sipping a very expensive-looking glass of red wine she'd bought for us, though I never drank anymore. "Oh, those old things," she said, not looking up. "I had them moved." "Moved where?" I asked, a cold knot forming in my stomach. "Well, they were dusty, Mom. And honestly, they don't match the new aesthetic I'm planning." I called my contact at Sotheby's. He said they're worth a small fortune. I had them picked up and taken to a secure, climate-controlled storage unit downtown. "But they were Williams," I whispered. "I liked them right there." She finally looked up, her expression a mix of patronizing sympathy and slight annoyance. "Eleanor, honey, we need to start thinking about liquidity. You have this enormous house, but William left you cash poor. Bless his heart. We need to maximize these assets. Besides, the new owner would probably hate that old-fashioned wallpaper. We need to declutter." "Smart, Mom. Trust me. Liquidity. New aesthetic. New owner." The words hung in the air like poison. I hadn't discussed selling the house. Not once. She hadn't even suggested it. Yet here she was talking about the new owner as if the sale was a foregone conclusion, a decision already made for me. I started noticing other things. The locked safe in William's study, which he'd always told me the combination to, was now firmly shut. Clara had replaced the old, simple key to the filing cabinet with a complex electronic lock. She was managing the house, yes, but more accurately, she was securing an asset. And the asset was me and everything William left behind. I began to feel like a guest in my own house, or worse, a geriatric patient being managed by a well-meaning but controlling nurse. The shift from taking care of me to taking over for me was complete. That conversation about the maps was the turning point. It woke me up from the fog of grief. I realized with a sickening certainty that Clara wasn't protecting me. She was sizing up the estate, preparing to carve it up, and she saw me as the main obstacle. My passivity, my trust, and my grief had given her the window she needed. She saw William's death not as a tragedy, but as a career opportunity. But William wasn't just a romantic. He was a financial genius. He was a man who worked for 40 years in the most cutthroat private banking environment. A man who trusted his gut more than any legal contract. And he knew his daughter-in-law. Even before his diagnosis, he had seen the glint in her eyes, the way she measured success purely in square footage and stock options. He had left me with a contingency. I just had to figure out how to access it before Clara made her final lethal move. The house wasn't just a symbol of our love. It was the final battlefield. The subtle manipulations were ending. I knew deep down that the overt betrayal, the seizure of everything, was coming next. The low, persistent hum of a photocopier became the soundtrack to my fear. It came from William's study, now Clara's command center. The conversations on the phone, once sweet and hushed, became clipped, professional, and full of terminology I barely understood. Probate, durable power of attorney, accelerated liquidation. The atmosphere in my own home shifted from one of quiet grief to aggressive, cold commerce. I realized I couldn't just mourn anymore. I had to become an operative. My first task was to understand the extent of my vulnerability. I had signed so many documents while drifting through my grief. How many of them were benign, and how many had been instruments of my own undoing? I started watching Clara. She kept meticulous, physical files, but she relied heavily on her phone and her encrypted laptop, which she never let out of her sight. Her arrogance, however, was her Achilles heel. She believed I was already defeated. A helpless, teary old woman whose only remaining function was to sign on the dotted line. She stopped trying to conceal her purpose. One Tuesday afternoon, while Clara was out showing a totally off-market pre-list opportunity that I knew was my house, the mail arrived. Tucked between a glossy magazine and a credit card offer was a thick, legal-sized envelope addressed only to William's estate. I ripped it open, my hands shaking. The contents were dense, formal, and terrifying. It was a formal motion, the legal/financial move, filed by an attorney I'd never heard of, naming Clara as the primary executor and requesting the court expedite the sale of the primary residential asset based on the protagonist's alleged inability to manage her financial affairs due to recent bereavement and age. The document included a copy of a power of attorney agreement I had signed a few weeks prior. It wasn't the utility transfer form I thought it was. It was a total transfer of control. But the truly venomous detail was a small, notarized affidavit, ostensibly from me, stating that the house was far too large for my needs and that I had requested an immediate sale to fund my future, downsized lifestyle. I had signed no such thing. She had forged my consent. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just theft. This was legal gaslighting. She was using the machinery of the state to legitimize her greed. The motion specified a date, an expedited settlement hearing in 10 days. 10 days until the house, my home, my history, was legally taken out of my hands and listed on the open market. I had to be careful. I knew if I confronted her now, she would lock me out of everything, possibly even have me removed from the house entirely, claiming I was volatile. My son Michael was still 3,000 miles away, and her control over his communication with me was absolute. I was alone and I had 10 days. The next day came the discovery. Clara was in the back garden taking a call. She thought I was upstairs napping, but I was standing silently in the shadow of the pantry door, a cup of cooling tea in my hands. Her voice was low and triumphant. Yes, of course, the appraisal is finalized. I told you my mother-in-law is practically non-compos mentis right now. She signed everything I put in front of her. That power of attorney gives me the right to do literally anything. No, Michael knows nothing. He just thinks I'm being a good daughter-in-law, managing the bills. He thinks I'm the one paying the mortgage now. The idiot. She laughed, a short, sharp sound that felt like a punch to the gut. He actually thinks I'm the one keeping his mother afloat. He's too busy building bridges to notice I'm burning ours down. Hearing her call my son an idiot for trusting his wife was the second, deeper cut. Her betrayal was comprehensive. It wasn't just against me, but against the very idea of family, against the man she married. The only thing that concerned me, she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, is the one weird little clause in William's will. You know, the original one from 20 years ago. The one I found and shredded. My breath hitched. The original will? It had some ridiculous, archaic stipulation about the trust. Something about if the property was ever put up for sale within 1 year of his death, the title would revert to the William and Eleanor Family Trust, 1995 edition, and the only person with unilateral authority over the disposition of the assets would be the designated administrator of that trust. It was completely insane, but I didn't want to risk anyone seeing it. It's gone. It's only the simple single-page will he signed last year, after his diagnosis. That one is clean. That one gives everything to Michael, and my power of attorney gives everything to me. She was so sure. She had destroyed the old will. She had coerced the new one. She had the fraudulent power of attorney. She had the court date. But I wasn't listening to her victory lap. I was listening to the words she considered irrelevant. The William and Eleanor Family Trust, 1995 edition. That was the name William had whispered to me in the hospital, his voice raspy, his eyes wide with urgency. Eleanor, he'd pleaded, his hand gripping mine. If things go wrong, if they try to change the landscape, remember the 95. Remember where I put the key. I now had the legal term. I knew the name of William's safety net. Clara had only shredded the will. She hadn't destroyed the trust itself. A will is a blueprint for distribution. A trust is a legal entity that holds assets and supersedes a will. The house wasn't William's to give away in his recent will if it was already legally owned by that 1995 trust. Clara's greatest confidence was her knowledge of the law. Her greatest flaw was her inability to respect history. She thought a 20-year-old document was simply archaic and disposable. This initiated the preparation, the quiet activation of my hidden strength. I spent the next 3 days moving like a ghost. Clara was oblivious, too busy finalizing her presentation for the court hearing. I started in the garden, where William had mentioned the key. He was a gardener and he was sentimental. I remembered a small, smooth stone, a quartz piece he had cemented into the flagstone path 10 years ago, after we installed a new security system. He joked about it being his fail-safe. Working only while Clara was gone, I used a dull butter knife to carefully scrape away the grout surrounding the stone. It took 2 hours of painful, repetitive work. When the stone finally popped out, there was a small, perfectly dry cavity beneath it. Inside, wrapped in thick, protective wax paper, was an old tarnished brass key. A safety deposit box key. That night, after Clara had fallen asleep, still clinging to her phone, I pulled out the small, folded document I kept under my pillow. The key to the next step. It was a note, written in William's perfect, elegant script. It said, "Eleanor, my love, if you need this key, you know who to call. Use the code 1995 Trust, Notary RM. You are stronger than you know." The note included a single name and phone number. Mr. Wallace F. Chan, attorney at law. William's old, trusted friend from his banking days. The next morning, while Clara was in the shower, I used an ancient, untraceable flip phone I kept charged in a drawer. A gift from William for emergencies, and made the call. My voice was shaky, but the moment I spoke the code, 1995 Trust, Notary RM, the gentleman on the other end of the line became instantly serious. "Mrs. Davies," Mr. Chan said, his voice grave, "I was hoping I would never hear from you. William and I prepared for this day 2 decades ago. The trust is active. The house has been protected. Bring me the key, and we will set the trap." I had 10 days. Clara thought she had one. She didn't realize that in her frantic zeal to destroy the new will, she had confirmed the existence of the one thing that rendered her entire scheme worthless. She was walking straight into the most expensive, devastating ambush of her life. The day of the settlement hearing arrived with the same cold, sharp inevitability as that 5 a.m. alarm. I was seated in a conference room that felt less like an office and more like a minimalist arena. On my left, Mr. Chan, William's old, silver-haired attorney, sat silently, radiating an unnerving calm. I had spent the last week doing exactly what he told me. Nothing. I signed no papers, answered no calls from Clara's attorney, and maintained the facade of a fragile, broken woman. Across the gleaming mahogany table sat Clara. She was a vision of professional confidence in a razor-sharp gray suit. Beside her was her counsel, a young, aggressive lawyer named Mr. Sterling, whose tie was far too loud for his competency. Clara avoided my eyes, but her posture screamed triumph. She had already mentally signed the closing papers and deposited the check. The purpose of the meeting, as dictated by Clara's motion, was to officially appoint her as the sole, enduring financial agent, enabling her to execute the immediate sale of the primary residence to satisfy my alleged financial instability. It was a thinly veiled eviction. The courtroom/showdown began not with the judge, but with Mr. Sterling laying out Clara's case with nauseating self-importance. "Your Honor, we are here today to formalize a necessary transition," Sterling droned, addressing the senior partner acting as a mediator. Mrs. Eleanor Davies, due to the tragic passing of her husband, Mr. William Davies, is in a state of emotional and financial duress. She signed a durable power of attorney, freely and willingly, authorizing my client, Mrs. Clara Davies, her loving daughter-in-law, to manage her assets and secure her future. He motioned to a stack of documents. "We have the signed power of attorney, the notarized affidavit confirming Mrs. Davies' desire to downsize, and the appraisals which show the need for immediate liquidation to cover estate costs. He paused, offering Clara a smug smile. My client has acted only out of selfless love, putting her own career on hold to manage this difficult transition. Clara finally spoke, her voice dripping with forced empathy. Mom, please understand, this is for your own good. That house is a burden. It's too much upkeep. Michael and I just want to see you settled comfortably in a lovely, manageable condo. Once we sell, you'll be financially secure for the rest of your life. She made it sound like a gift, not a robbery. The mediator, a tired-looking woman, turned to Mr. Chun. Mr. Chun, does your client dispute the validity of the durable power of attorney? Mr. Chun looked at me. It was the moment to perform. Eleanor. Mr. Chun prompted. I started to cry. Not the fake theatrical tears Clara specialized in, but deep, rattling sobs born of genuine pain and acting. I buried my face in my hands. I don't know. I choked out, my voice weak and trembling. I signed so many things. Clara kept telling me they were just for the utilities. I was grieving, sir. I trusted her. She said she loved me. Clara rolled her eyes and muttered something under her breath about drama. Her mistake. She was underestimating my performance. Mr. Sterling jumped on my apparent weakness. Your Honor, this is precisely why Mrs. Clara Davies must be given full financial control. Mrs. Davies is clearly incapable of rational decision-making. She admits she doesn't even recall signing the documents. This is a clear case of cognitive frailty exacerbated by grief. He spun back to me. Mrs. Davies, is it not true that you specifically asked your daughter-in-law to take over everything because you felt overwhelmed? I lifted my head, my eyes red and wet, yet wide with feigned confusion. I asked her to help with the bills, yes. I thought she was helping me. I didn't know she was planning to take William's house and call herself the new owner. The last phrase was a direct, quiet echo of the 5 a.m. betrayal, and it hit Clara like a hidden spike. She actually flinched. The mediator leaned forward, looking severely at Clara. Mrs. Davies, we have a clear signed power of attorney. Barring evidence of outright coercion, which is very difficult to prove in these cases, this document grants your client broad authority. Mr. Chun, what is your motion? This was the emotional low point. I had played the part of the defeated widow perfectly. Now it was Clara's turn to bask in her seeming victory. Mr. Chun, however, made no motion. He simply said, We do not dispute the power of attorney, Your Honor. Clara smirked, folding her arms. Sterling looked smug. However, Mr. Chun continued, his voice calm and precise, we move to dismiss the motion for expedited sale on the grounds of pre-existing title protection. Clara's smirk froze. Sterling's tie suddenly looked less important. Sterling sputtered. Objection. What title protection? The title is clear, in the name of the late William Davies. The will is clear, passing to the heir, which is Michael Davies, whose wife is the acting agent. And this is where we get to the fatal mistake, I thought. Clara, too confident in her destruction of the older will, leaned forward, her eyes flashing with pure, arrogant rage. She felt the victory slipping and her control snapped. She didn't rely on her lawyer. She spoke directly, addressing the mediator, not realizing she was digging her own grave. Your Honor, this is a pathetic delaying tactic. My mother-in-law is referencing an archaic, shredded will from 1995 that contains some ridiculous, impossible clause about a trust that was never funded. I personally oversaw the cleaning of Mr. Davies's files after his passing. That document is destroyed. The 1995 trust is defunct. My husband and I are the rightful heirs, and I have the legal means to finalize the sale. Any discussion of a 20-year-old trust is immaterial because the associated document was irrevocably destroyed before probate began. She delivered this monologue with fury and certainty, certain that her meticulous destruction of the evidence made the claim impossible to prosecute. She looked straight at me, her eyes burning with hatred, confirming every word she had whispered on the phone. She had shredded the will. She had confirmed the 1995 trust was the issue. She had lied to the mediator about her personal actions regarding the estate documents. Mr. Chun raised one eyebrow, not at Clara, but at the mediator, who was now taking furious notes on Clara's admission of document destruction. "Thank you, Mrs. Davies," Mr. Chun said politely, his voice laced with venom. "Your testimony regarding the willful destruction of estate documents is noted and appreciated. It actually confirms our next submission." He leaned back, finally looking at me with a quick, meaningful glance. The moment of despair was over. Clara had, in her moment of peak arrogance, given us everything we needed to demolish her. The true defeat was not mine, but the fact that she believed I was too weak to even notice she was winning. She mistook my sorrow for stupidity. That was her one fatal, unforgivable omission. The silence in the conference room after Clara's furious confession was absolute. Mr. Sterling, her counsel, looked physically ill. He clearly hadn't been informed of his client's illegal document destruction. Clara, however, sat with a defiant glare, still convinced that since the document was gone, she was safe. "Mr. Chun," the mediator prompted, her pen hovering over her notepad, "since the power of attorney appears valid, and Mrs. Clara Davies admits to destroying the older will, which she claims invalidates the trust, what exactly is your basis for this pre-existing title protection?" This was it. The moment I had been rehearsing for 7 days. This was the reveal. Mr. Chun reached into his slim briefcase and pulled out not a will, but a thick leather-bound volume, smaller than a dictionary but heavier than a brick. It was sealed with a vibrant red ribbon and an official-looking embossed gold seal. "The basis, Your Honor," Mr. Chun stated, his voice now ringing with authority, "is that the house at 426 Evergreen Lane was and remains the principal asset of the William and Eleanor Family Trust, 1995 edition. A trust, unlike a will, is a separate legal entity. A will details who gets what after death. A trust dictates who owns what before death, and holds the assets in perpetuity." He pushed the volume across the table. "This is a certified copy of the original trust indenture, recorded and filed 20 years ago with the county recorder's office. Its existence is a matter of public record. Furthermore, its terms are irrevocable." Clara laughed, a frantic high-pitched sound that was rapidly unraveling. "This is ridiculous. That trust was a paper exercise. It was never funded. My husband, Michael, is the sole heir under the terms of the recent will." "That is where you are catastrophically mistaken, Mrs. Davies," I interjected quietly, my voice steady for the first time that day. I fixed her with a cold, hard stare. "You see, William was a private banker. He specialized in asset protection from exactly this sort of predatory maneuvering. You were so busy destroying the will that was superseded by the trust, you failed to confirm one crucial detail." Mr. Chun opened the document to a specific page. Article 4 of the 1995 trust states clearly, "The title for the property at 426 Evergreen Lane was executed via a quitclaim deed filed in 1996, transferring the asset out of William and Eleanor Davies' personal names and into the ownership of the William and Eleanor Family Trust." He paused for dramatic effect, then delivered the final blow. "Crucially, the trust document stipulates that upon the death of William Davies, the primary trustee's role automatically transfers to the designated secondary trustee, who is currently and exclusively Eleanor Davies." Clara's face went white. She wasn't just an heir anymore. She was a thief trying to steal from a legal entity run by the very person she was trying to evict. The power of attorney she coerced from me was worthless against the trust, because I didn't personally own the house. The trust did. She needed to be the trustee to sell the house, and that title belonged only to me. But the funding," Clara stammered, grasping at her last thread of hope. "The trust had no liquid capital. It didn't need any," I responded, leaning across the table, enjoying the horror on her face. "Article 5 states that the primary trustee, that's me, has unilateral, undisputed authority to sell the property or to transfer ownership to any beneficiary of the trust, only if the sale is initiated 1 year and 1 day after the primary trustee's death. Not 1 day before." That was William's final layer of protection against impatience and greed. I then watched antagonists collapse. Clara shrieked. It wasn't a feminine cry. It was the sound of a trapped animal. She lunged across the table, hands open, aiming for the leather-bound book. That's a forgery. It's a lie. You fabricated this. Mr. Sterling leaped up and physically restrained her, whispering frantically, Clara, sit down. We are in a legal proceeding. The mediator slammed her hand on the table. Mrs. Clara Davies, control yourself. Mr. Chun, do you have the original quitclaim deed and trust filing numbers? Mr. Chun smiled faintly. Of course. And may I remind the court that Mrs. Clara Davies has just admitted under oath to the destruction of estate documents, a serious felony, and that this act was clearly motivated by an attempt to illegally seize an asset. Clara was a wreck. Tears were streaming down her face, mixing with the meticulously applied makeup. She wasn't crying over her son's mother. She was crying over the millions she thought she had secured. You old witch! She screamed at me, struggling against Sterling. You played me. You let me do all the work. You let me set up the sale. You called my son an idiot, I said, my voice cutting through her hysterics. You called yourself the new owner at 5 in the morning. You thought I was too broken to fight. I merely gave you enough rope, Clara, to hang your own greed. The mediator looked at the documents, looked at Clara's collapsing facade, and then made her ruling. Based on the evidence presented by Mr. Chun, and the explicit testimony provided by Mrs. Clara Davies regarding her destruction of estate documents, the motion for expedited sale is hereby dismissed with extreme prejudice. Furthermore, all power of attorney agreements executed between Eleanor Davies and Clara Davies are immediately nullified. This matter is now referred to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into fraud and destruction of legal documents. Clara slumped back in her chair, utterly defeated. She had not only failed to steal the house, she had incriminated herself in a criminal act and lost every vestige of trust and authority. Her dream of becoming a millionaire heiress was reduced to the prospect of jail time. The legal/financial consequences were swift and brutal. Mr. Chun had already notified my son Michael, who, upon learning the truth, that his wife had been plotting to steal his family home and had disparaged him as an idiot in the process, was flying home immediately, his marriage already irreparably damaged. Clara was not only stripped of the house, but the district attorney's office impounded her laptop and business records. The sale of William's maps, the first insult, was immediately reversed and the funds frozen. Her career as a realtor was over, likely permanently revoked due to the fraud investigation. She lost everything. Her money, her profession, her reputation, and her marriage. She fled the room before the mediator had finished speaking, stumbling out the door with Mr. Sterling trying desperately to salvage his own reputation. I watched her go, not with hatred, but with a profound, weary satisfaction. The house was safe. William's wisdom had prevailed. I had survived the attempt on my life and my legacy. The weeks that followed the hearing were not filled with wild celebration, but with a profound, bone-deep quiet. Protagonist's piece wasn't loud. It was the soft, almost forgotten sound of a lock turning in a door, recognizing my touch. I walked through the house, no longer as a victim waiting for the next legal threat, but as the undisputed sovereign owner. The shadows of grief were still present, but they were now illuminated by the steady light of vindication. The first thing I did was rehang William's naval maps. I didn't use Clara's auction contact. I hired a local artisan who understood the history in the fading parchment. Seeing them back on the study wall, right next to the empty space where William's old safe used to be, a safe Clara had needlessly complicated, was a symbolic act of reclaiming our history. My son Michael finally arrived home, shaken and utterly heartbroken. He hadn't just lost a marriage. He had lost the belief that he could judge character. He was devastated that he hadn't seen his wife's ambition for what it was, and worst of all, that he had left me, his vulnerable mother, alone with a viper. We didn't talk about Clara much. We talked about William. We talked about his genius, his foresight, and the immense love that had led him to create the 1995 trust, not just to protect an asset, but to protect me from the greed he suspected lay dormant in his daughter-in-law. Michael and I spent the next few months working with Mr. Chun to modernize the trust, placing him as the secondary trustee. The house was finally secure, truly inviolable. With that burden lifted, I began to live again. I sold the big heavy car that Clara had restricted me from driving and bought a small zippy convertible. I didn't need the money from the house sale anymore, but the freedom was priceless. I booked a cruise around the Mediterranean, a trip William and I had always planned but never taken. I traveled alone, but I felt William's presence everywhere. In the clear blue water, in the scent of foreign air, and most importantly, in the unshakable peace of mind that I was truly free. My new home wasn't a condo, it was the grand old Georgian house, now filled only with love, memory, and the sound of my own quiet laughter. I only saw Clara one last time, the final sight. It was 5 months after the hearing. I was having lunch in a lovely, bustling cafe downtown. I was laughing with Michael, talking about my upcoming trip to Italy. Through the window I saw her. Clara was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting coat, standing at a bus stop, frantically scrolling on a cracked cell phone. She looked tired, aged, and hollowed out. She was no longer the polished, perfectly tailored realtor, but just another desperate woman in the crowd. I learned later she had lost her apartment, her car, and the legal issues had severely impacted her ability to find meaningful work. Michael filed for divorce and made sure she received only the assets she had brought into the marriage, which, thanks to her ambition to acquire everything, wasn't much. The sight of me, thriving, laughing, and clearly victorious, caught her eye. Her face twisted into a snarl, a raw, naked expression of pure, impotent rage and regret. She didn't look away. She glared, hatred radiating from her, trying to burn a hole through the cafe glass. I met her gaze, held it for a brief, cold second, and then I simply turned back to my son and took a sip of my wine. She had gambled everything on my helplessness and lost spectacularly. Her hatred was too late, her regret utterly useless. I had been awakened at 5 a.m. by a declaration of war. I answered it with William's quiet, brilliant strategy. The house was safe, my dignity restored, and my future, my new ownership, was guaranteed. The ultimate moral is simple. The greatest protection against greed is the quiet wisdom of those who truly love, and family strength is not measured in present noise, but in historical preparation.